A husband sits at his own dinner table and realizes the person he trusts most is tampering with his food. His wife moves like she's done it before, calm, casual, almost careless, because she believes he won't notice and won't question. This isn't a marriage argument or a bad night. This is betrayal with intent inside the safest place a man is supposed to have. And when the threat comes from the person sharing the home, it stops being about love and starts being about survival. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them. So in a moment like this, what's the move? Stay quiet and pretend nothing happened, or act immediately and protect yourself before the truth becomes irreversible. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey, because what starts as a normal dinner can turn into something you never forget. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. I've always believed in the architecture of control. Maybe it's the only way you survive in this business, never losing sight of the smallest detail, never leaving a single line item unchecked. Every morning as sunlight poured through the 28th floor windows of Republic Plaza and spilled across my desk, I reminded myself how far I'd come. From cleaning rooms in a rundown Santa Fe inn to closing deals in glass towers above Denver, my life had become a case study in hard-won success. I built this 5 boutique hotels, each one my name on the paperwork, every brick and lamp and line of the P&L traced back to a choice I made. My name is Knox Merrick, and if there's one thing I know, it's how to protect what I've built. At least that's what I thought. That Tuesday, we were wrapping up final negotiations to expand the Lodo flagship, adding a spa and a 300-seat conference wing. Graham, my COO, and the rare person I trust in business, sat across from me at the boardroom table, running through projections and market data with his usual dry precision. He reminded me of the numbers, the market risks, but also the reward. I felt good. Not arrogant, never that, but solid, anchored in the knowledge that every moving part of this company answered to me. It's a strange truth that the higher you climb, the more you crave simplicity. I'd found mine in Cherry Creek, a tree-lined neighborhood where our house looked like something out of an aspirational magazine spread. Every evening coming home was a ritual. Park, drop my bag in the mudroom, take a breath before opening the kitchen door. Elawan always seemed to know exactly when to start the playlist, how to light the room just right so it never felt staged. That night the table was set for 2 with real napkins, candles that smelled faintly of cedar, and my favorite bottle of Syrah breathing in the corner. There's something insidious about comfort when it's done too well. It makes you lower your guard. Elawan, my wife, my partner, the kind of woman who could light up a hotel lobby and have every investor eating out of her hand before dessert. She was the glue of every social event, the secret asset behind our most successful launches. People saw us and thought, picture-perfect Denver power couple building a future, one grand opening at a time. I let her in on every aspect of my work. She came to events, met my staff, stood at my side for press photos. It was more than trust. It was the sense that together we could weather anything. She made it easy to believe the world was exactly as it should be. After dinner, we lingered at the table. It was Elawan who steered the conversation from my day to the practicalities of our lives, life insurance, estate planning, succession. If something ever happened to you, who gets to sign for the hotels? What does the payout look like? She asked, casual but sharp. It struck me as a little odd how easily she navigated the legal jargon, how her questions came so naturally. Still, I chalked it up to caution. After all, every successful person I know has a plan for worst-case scenarios. She was just being practical. That's what I told myself. There's a particular discomfort in noticing the smallest fracture. Rhett, my younger brother, showed up unannounced with a 6-pack of local craft beer and a story about his latest failed side gig. He made himself at home in a way that bordered on overfamiliar, talking to Elawan about everything from football to market trends, ribbing me with that old rehearsed line, "You always land on your feet, don't you?" Knox Elawan was perfect, with him knowing exactly which buttons to push to keep Rhett from sulking. I felt for the first time in a long time like an outsider in my own living room. The evening wore on. After Rhett left, Graham texted me a question about a stray legal fee, something minor, a processing charge tied to a policy update or legal consult. I dismissed it, assuming accounting would sort it out. But when I replayed the conversation with Elowen in my head later, it stuck with me. She'd asked about signature authority. She'd wanted to know who could step in if I suddenly wasn't there to sign. It was all too specific, too well-timed. I lay awake, the hum of the city outside, wondering when my home had started to feel like another boardroom negotiation. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe not. But from that moment, I resolved to pay attention. The table had been set perfectly, the evening orchestrated for comfort, but I'd started to sense there was something beneath the surface, a different kind of deal being made. I just didn't know yet if I was the one signing away control. The days that followed took on a rhythm that was almost oppressive in its precision. Elowen became even more attentive, but it wasn't the spontaneous affection I remembered. Instead, it felt like surveillance masquerading as care. She'd ask in passing, but pointedly, about my upcoming trip to Santa Fe for 2 days, Charleston for a site visit, San Diego next month for the Industry Expo. What hotel are you staying at? Who's picking you up from the airport? Let me manage your calendar, make things easier for you. Her words made sense, but her insistence did not. She was logging every detail, every movement, like a project manager charting risk. One morning, I opened my phone to find a calendar invite for a policy review meeting with our life insurance provider, an appointment I never set at a time I was scheduled to be in a quarterly review. The confirmation was in my inbox, but the event had been created from a device registered to our home network. My assistant swore she hadn't booked it. I tried to brush it off as a glitch, but my skin prickled. I started to wonder if these were really accidents at all. That night, I broached the subject over dinner, careful to keep my tone light. Did you schedule a call with the insurance people for me? I asked. Elowen didn't even blink. You've been so stressed, I just want to make sure you're protected. If something happened, I want things to be smooth for you and for us. She smiled earnest and practiced and said, if the day comes when the pressure finally gets you, I want everything to be handled cleanly. It was the kind of line that sticks with you, a pre-written eulogy disguised as compassion. I should have let it go, but a kernel of unease had taken root. That weekend, as I was refilling the printer with paper in my office, I found a torn sheet in the waste tray. It was a partially printed beneficiary update form, my name already typed in, along with details only I would know. The handwriting in the margins was Elowen's, looping Insure with check marks beside every section. The rest of the printout had been shredded, but the intent was clear. She was preparing to update policy documents, and more disturbingly, to do it without me present. The discovery sent a chill through me, a practical, businesslike approach to a world where I might no longer exist. Rhett showed up again just as I was puzzling over the form. He'd always been the king of bad timing, but tonight it was different. He found me in the kitchen, shot me a look, and said, "Don't make a big deal out of it, man. She just cares." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I realized then that Rhett already knew about the insurance appointment, maybe even more than I did. I caught his eye searching for a hint of guilt, but he looked away, muttering something about a fantasy football draft. It was a pattern I couldn't unsee, Elowen setting appointments, printing out legal forms in secret, Rhett conveniently in the loop for every administrative detail. I started keeping my own notes, recording every time she asked about my flights, every surprise visit from Rhett, every oddity in the mail or email. If there was a plan being set in motion, I was determined to chart its progress. The pressure mounted. I reviewed my calendar, tracing the digital footprints of every appointment. The insurance review had been scheduled from our living room, not the office. The torn beneficiary form had my signature space left blank, waiting. And Elowen over dinner grew ever more fluent in the language of loss and succession. If anything ever happens, I want you to know I'll handle it. You don't have to worry. But the more she talked about it, the more I worried. By the end of that week, my faith in the simple logic of love had been replaced by a darker certainty someone was scripting a story about my future that didn't include me in it. I stopped waiting for outright proof. Instead, I started looking for the trail they were leaving, one careful breadcrumb at a time. There was no confrontation, no explosive argument, only the silent, methodical tightening of a net I hadn't realized was there until it was almost closed. And so I watched and waited, knowing now that I could not afford a single careless step. Some truths you only let yourself uncover when you're alone in the dark. It was close to midnight in my office at Republic Plaza, The city below hushed by fresh snow, the world moving slow while my thoughts raced in feverish loops. I told myself I was being cautious, that I was just double-checking, but I knew the real reason I was scared. I was scared of what I'd find if I looked closely enough at my own life. My hand shook as I powered up the old family laptop, the one that sat mostly untouched in the den except for travel bookings and Alohan's recipe hunts. The faint hum of the hard drive made my heart jump. I opened the browser history, first expecting to see a few searches about Denver brunch spots or garden soil. What I found was a series of searches repeated always in clusters. Untraceable poisons. How to make a death look natural. How long does it take to get a life insurance payout after husband dies? Transfer ownership of LLC after owner's death. Symptoms of low-dose poisoning over time. The screen glowed with my own mortality spelled out in clinical search bars and advice forums. I scrolled, each click a test of my own resolve. There was a search about accumulation doses and another about safe window to call 911 for natural-looking death. It was so systematic, so calculated, I had to close my eyes for a second. I told myself maybe a neighbor used our Wi-Fi, maybe it was some kind of malware or spam. But the tabs were open to Alohan's regular login synced with our home Google account. She'd always said she didn't trust passwords on public Wi-Fi. I realized with sudden clarity just how much she'd learned to hide. Trying to shake it off, I went into our shared photo archive. That's when I noticed something else, a file labeled signature_clean, dated just last week. It was a high-resolution scan of my signature, the kind you'd pull from a notarized document cropped perfectly with no background. I'd never uploaded anything like that. My signature isn't the kind of thing you just happen to save unless you have a reason to copy it. I sat back, my pulse thudding in my ears. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to imagine there was some harmless explanation, a bizarre string of coincidences, but each piece fit too perfectly. I thought about the insurance appointments, the perfectly timed calendar, invites, the shredded policy forms. It all fit a pattern, one I was only now willing to see. I called Graham, my voice raw and hollow even to myself. I need you to check something for me, I said. Don't tell anyone. I need to know if there's been any activity fees, request changes on the company insurance or legal side. Anything off. Graham went quiet for a beat, then replied, "Funny you called. There's been a few weird logins on the business admin side, some after midnight. And last week someone asked for a verification on policy documents and beneficiary updates. The request didn't come from your IP." A cold spike of adrenaline went through me. Graham said I didn't flag it, but I can dig deeper if you want. Just say the word. Do it, I said. And don't mention this to anyone. Not even staff. My mind reeled. I wondered if I was already too late. At home that night, Alohan was in the kitchen humming softly, making something that filled the house with the scent of roasted garlic and thyme. She looked at me with a practiced warmth and asked what I wanted for dinner, her eyes scanning my face as if measuring my energy. "You look tired, Knox," she said, watching for the answer. "Are you feeling okay? Should I make you something easy?" Her concern didn't feel like comfort. It felt like she was monitoring a science experiment. While she cooked, Rhett texted me, "Hope you're holding up, big guy." It seemed like nothing, but the timing was too precise. Rhett always reached out when Alohan was home, never when I was alone. I started to see the threads between them, not outright conspiratorial, but coordinated. I wondered how many of my routines were being watched and reported disguised as care or concern. I forced myself to act normal. I ate just enough to seem genuine, carefully controlling what went into my body. I told Alohan I had some late-night emails to catch up on and retreated to my office, where I began copying every incriminating file, every odd email, every trace of these searches onto a private hard drive I'd keep locked in my desk at Republic Plaza. If anything happened, at least there'd be a record. As the hours stretched on, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't show my hand, not yet. I needed them to believe I was still blind, still trusting. I would let them keep playing their game, moving their pieces. All the while, I would be watching, preparing for the moment when I'd have to protect myself no matter what it cost. And as I stood in the doorway that night watching Elowen finish the dishes in the soft kitchen light, I realized that the room where I'd once felt most safe could soon become a crime scene if I wasn't careful. It's a strange thing to wake up each morning and catalog your own symptoms, knowing deep down they don't belong to the stress of running a hotel empire. The pain started small, a twisting in my gut, the kind that made me double over in the shower before dawn. I chalked it up to too much coffee-skipped meals deadlines. But it didn't go away. Day after day, I felt weaker. My clothes hung off me, my belt had to be cinched tighter, and my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked pale and drawn as if someone had swapped me for a paler version of myself. Every morning, Elowen made breakfast, scrambled eggs, steel-cut oats, a smoothie she insisted would keep my immune system strong. She handed me a vitamin, sometimes two, dropping them into my palm with a gentle smile. "You need to take care of yourself, Knox. The business needs you." I'd try to eat just enough to keep up appearances, sipping at the smoothie, palming the vitamins, watching her eyes as she tracked every bite, every swallow. I became an actor in my own kitchen, running lines from a script I was never meant to read. Despite my best efforts, the symptoms worsened. After meals, my heart would race, sweat would beat on my neck, and a wave of nausea would hit. One afternoon, after barely touching lunch, I had to steady myself against the conference room wall at Republic Plaza, fighting off a dizzy spell. The team noticed I brushed it off, blaming jet lag from a recent trip. But even Graham started asking if I was all right, concern shadowing his usually dry tone. Things escalated when Graham called late one night. He'd found new activity, another attempt to verify policy access, this time from a contact claiming to be a family representative. Graham refused to sign off, sensing something off. "They're trying the doors, Knox," he said, "testing what they can get away with." My instincts screamed this was more than paperwork. Someone was testing how close they could get to the vault before setting off alarms. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not just by Elowen, but by my own brother. Rhett's messages became more frequent, his visits timed for when I was weakest. He always brought up the business, the expansion, the strain of running it all. "Don't you ever get tired of being the one in charge?" he asked over beers one night. I wondered if that was what this was about: envy, resentment, the itch to finally win at something. When my symptoms became impossible to ignore, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Annika Rowe, a physician I trusted in downtown Denver. She listened intently as I described the stomach pain, the weight loss, the crushing fatigue. Her questions were pointed. "What are you eating? Who prepares your food? Has anything changed at home?" She ordered a full panel of tests, including heavy metals and toxins. When she asked, "Any chance you've been exposed to arsenic or another accumulative toxin?" my blood ran cold. I didn't answer, but I saw the search history in my mind, the file with my signature, the new routines Elowen had built around my meals. The dots began to connect in ways I could no longer dismiss. Driven by a mixture of fear and grim resolve, I waited for a morning when Elowen left early for yoga and searched our garage and tool cabinets. It didn't take long. Tucked behind a row of paint cans, I found 3 small glass bottles, unlabeled, half full of clear liquid. Next to them was a dropper and a notepad, a meticulous log of my daily routines. Breakfast oatmeal mix in smoothie, dinner pasta easier to hide. Time symptoms, even notes about which foods I finished and which I pushed aside. I snapped photos, then put everything back exactly as I'd found it. My hands trembled the whole time. That night I pretended to fall asleep early, lying in the dark, listening as Elowen took a phone call in the living room. Her voice was low, urgent. I only caught fragments. "He's weaker than we thought." "No, not yet. It has to look natural, remember? Just a few more days." I knew without a doubt who was on the other end. Rhett's voice barely audible, but sharp as ever. The plan was real, it was ongoing, and it was accelerating. The next morning I played my part. Ate half the eggs, poured the smoothie down the drain when she left the room, pocketed the vitamins for the trash at work. I couldn't risk tipping my hand now, not with the evidence mounting. Graham called again with an update, still more attempts to push through account changes and policy updates, each one more desperate than the last. At work, I drifted through meetings, my mind half on expansion plans, half on the garage, the bottles, the log, the conversation I'd overheard. I watched Elowen at dinner that night, noting the way her eyes followed every movement, waiting for signs of progress or failure. I realized my survival depended not just on what I did, but on making sure she never suspected that I knew. That night, as the city lights flickered beyond our bedroom window, I came to a decision. I had to act like prey but plan like a predator. If Elowen or Rhett ever caught on that I'd found the evidence, the final dose might come sooner than I could prepare. The game had changed. I wasn't just protecting my fortune now, I was fighting for my life in a house that had become my cage. Once you realize you're being hunted, you stop reacting and start building traps. I couldn't confront Elowen, not yet. Words would only give her time to adjust, to pivot. What I needed was proof that didn't depend on my voice, proof that would speak when I couldn't. On my lunch break one afternoon, I drove to Rhino under the pretense of scouting a pop-up art space for a future hotel event. I walked into a small electronics shop that catered to creatives and contractors, the kind of place that sold discreet gear without asking too many questions. I bought 3 compact wireless cameras, each no larger than a deck of cards, with cloud storage and motion alerts routed straight to my phone. I paid in cash, declined installation help, and left with my heart hammering like I'd just committed a crime. That night, I planned every placement like a military operation. One camera went into the kitchen, angled carefully to capture the dining table and counter where meals were prepared. Another went into the living room, hidden behind a photo frame on the bookshelf with a clear line of sight to the sofa. The last one I tucked into the garage, positioned toward the shelf where I'd found the bottles and the notebook. I tested each feed from my office later, adjusting angles until everything looked mundane, invisible. I set the system to back up automatically. If my phone disappeared, the footage would still exist. The first few days nearly broke me. I watched hours of nothing, Elowen cooking, wiping down counters, scrolling her phone. She laughed at something on TV. She watered the plants. I started to wonder if I'd crossed a line, if grief and paranoia had turned my marriage into surveillance footage. But discipline mattered more than comfort. I reminded myself that the truth doesn't announce itself. It waits. The alert came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing budgets at Republic Plaza. My phone vibrated softly. Living room motion detected. I opened the feed, expecting nothing. Instead, I saw Rhett sitting on the sofa, close enough to Elowen that their knees almost touched. They weren't acting like siblings-in-law. They were relaxed, familiar bodies angled toward each other. I turned the volume up and let the recording run. They spoke about plans the way Graham and I spoke about expansions. Calm, focused. Elowen mentioned the substance by name, talking about how it needed time, how small amounts avoided attention. Rhett nodded, listing off symptoms I'd been living with for weeks: fatigue, weight loss, nausea, as if checking items off a spreadsheet. They talked about forged paperwork, about changing beneficiary structures so Rhett would take over operational control without raising flags. They talked about my death like it was a scheduling problem. When Elowen leaned into Rhett and kissed him slow and practiced, something inside me went numb. This wasn't desperation. This was partnership. They spoke about the future with ease, Elowen playing the grieving widow, Rhett stepping in to help the family, the hotels continuing under new leadership. They even rehearsed explanations: stress, burnout, a man who pushed himself too hard and finally collapsed. It was all there, spoken aloud in my living room. Rhett asked when it would be over. Elowen named a date, one I recognized instantly. A night I was always home. A dinner I would never suspect. She explained that the final amount would work fast hours at most, just enough time for her to call for help and control the narrative. I checked my calendar with shaking hands. The countdown had started. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my office long after dark, watching the city lights flicker and replaying the footage until every word was etched into my memory. Then I made another call, this one to Carmen Ruiz, a lawyer whose reputation was built on discretion and survival. I didn't dump evidence on her desk. I told her I was afraid someone was trying to harm me, that I needed advice on how to protect myself and document concerns properly. She agreed to meet privately the next morning. That night, Elowen played her role flawlessly at a charity event at the Lodo Hotel, smiling for photos, touching my arm as if nothing in the world was wrong. I watched her across the room and understood something cold and final. This wasn't about love or even hatred. It was about control and time. When I got home, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the table where we'd shared hundreds of meals. I marked the date in my mind. Evidence wasn't enough anymore. I needed a way to survive that dinner without becoming the villain in their story. From that point on, every meal became an exercise in precision. I couldn't refuse food outright that would have raised questions. Instead, I learned to perform. I ate slowly, took small bites, let food linger on my plate. When Elowen turned her back, I disposed of what I could in a separate trash bag I took to work the next day. I watched her eyes track the sink, the trash, the plates. She was checking my work. She changed tactics quickly. Different meals, different drinks, things that would blend easily, leave no smell or taste. She asked how I felt after eating too many questions too close together. I gave her just enough weakness to keep her confident complaints about exhaustion headaches, but never enough to make her rush. It was a balance I maintained hour by hour. I collected samples when I could, sealing portions of drinks and food in containers and delivering them discreetly to Dr. Rowe through proper channels. I underwent another round of testing myself, building a medical record that showed prolonged exposure. Every document mattered, every timestamp. Graham called with more bad news. Someone had tried to push through a large transfer request using paperwork that looked legitimate at first glance. It referenced family authorization. Graham blocked it, but the intent was clear. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were positioning themselves to open every door the moment I fell. One afternoon, I nearly lost everything. Elowen decided to deep clean the house, moving with a methodical focus that set my nerves on edge. She opened cabinets, reorganized shelves, reached toward a spot where I'd hidden camera equipment. I had seconds to act. I redirected her with a distraction about a misplaced document, quietly relocating the equipment later, with my heart pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. That same night, reviewing footage, I saw something worse. Notes. A contingency plan. If I didn't die at home, if I ended up hospitalized, Elowen would control access, speak to doctors, manage visitors. She had rehearsed explanations ready, blaming stress and overwork. The net was layered. This wasn't a single attempt. It was a system. I met Carmen again, laid out timelines, asked how to answer questions I hadn't been asked yet. We arranged multiple backups of the footage and documents distributed across people and places I trusted. Graham knew enough to act if I went silent. Carmen knew where everything was. The final days passed in a blur of rehearsed normalcy. Elowen grew calmer, almost relieved. Rhett's messages slowed. The plan was set. The dinner was approaching. On the eve of it, I stood alone in the Cherry Creek kitchen, hands on the counter, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on me. I had evidence. I had witnesses waiting in the wings. I had a lawyer. But none of that mattered if I didn't make it through the night. I looked at the table at the place where my bowl would sit and understood what had to happen. If they thought I wasn't looking, they would act. And when they did, I would have to be ready to choose silently, decisively, between being the man they planned to bury and the one who walked away alive. By the time I sat down at the table, I had already accepted one hard truth. If I showed even a flicker of resistance, the night would end differently and not in my favor. Elowen had set the table with the same careful elegance she always used when she wanted things to feel normal. Candles, soft music, soup steaming in the bowls. Everything looked rehearsed, like a final run-through. I kept my posture loose, my voice steady. I smiled when she smiled. I answered when she asked about work, about future trips, about what we might do once things slowed down. But I noticed what mattered. She checked her phone more than usual. Her eyes drifted to the clock, then back to me, as if waiting for an invisible cue. She served the soup herself. I watched her hands closely. When she thought my attention was elsewhere, she slipped a small vial from her sleeve and tipped a clear liquid into my bowl. No hesitation, no tremor, just a clean, practiced motion. I didn't react. I breathed. I kept my face neutral. When her phone rang moments later and she stepped into the living room to take the call, I stood as if to grab a napkin and switched our bowls in one smooth movement. No clatter, no pause. I sat back down exactly as I had been. When Elowen returned, she watched me eat. Not like a wife sharing dinner, but like someone waiting for confirmation. I ate enough to sell it. She barely touched her own bowl, eyes locked on mine. Then slowly she began to eat. 20 minutes passed, then 25. She stopped mid-sentence. Her face drained of color. Her hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. She tried to stand and collapsed instead, hitting the kitchen floor hard. Her body convulsed violently. Foam formed at her lips. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Instinct screamed at me to step back. Reason forced me to stay present. This was the outcome of a plan meant for me. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message lit up the screen from Rhett. "Is it done? Let me know when he's gone." I picked up the phone long enough to see more. Draft messages, notes. A ready-made story painting me as unstable, volatile, dangerous. Even now, even as she lay dying, Alawan had prepared a version of events where I would be blamed. Another realization hit me harder than the rest. Earlier that evening, she'd handed me a glass of water. I'd taken a few sips to keep up appearances. My heart raced. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The poison hadn't been limited to the soup. I called 911. I described exactly what was visible and nothing more. Sudden collapse. Seizures. Emergency. I didn't clean anything. I didn't move the bowls or the pot. I didn't touch her phone again. Paramedics arrived first, then police. Alawan was unresponsive. The questions came fast. Who cooked? Who ate? Any arguments? Anyone else present? I answered calmly, consistently. We'd had dinner. She collapsed. I called for help. That night ended with Alawan gone and officers standing in my kitchen. I understood then that surviving the poison wasn't enough. I had to survive what came next. Being the one left standing immediately made me suspicious in their eyes. At the station, detectives pressed on every angle our marriage finances insurance opportunity. I didn't argue. I didn't volunteer theories. I asked for my lawyer and answered only what I was asked. The initial findings pointed to poisoning. That alone could have turned everything against me. Timing mattered now more than ever. With Carmen Ruiz present, I laid out the sequence carefully. First, my medical records. Weeks of documented symptoms. Tests confirming prolonged exposure to toxic substances. Evidence that I'd been deteriorating long before that night. Then the recordings. The room changed when detectives watched Alawan and Rhett discuss dosage timing paperwork and how my death would be explained. It wasn't speculation. It was planning. Calm and methodical. Graham followed with financial logs, unauthorized access attempts, forged authorizations requests made under the guise of family representation. The motives snapped into focus. Rhett didn't wait around. He tried to leave the country. They caught him at Denver International Airport with cash documents and devices tied to the attempted transfers. 6 months later, the case went to trial. The prosecution laid it out clearly: a prolonged attempt to poison me, seize control of my businesses, and erase me without suspicion. Rhett was convicted. There was no confusion about his role. I visited him once in prison. He didn't apologize. He said he was tired of living in my shadow and believed I would have collapsed eventually anyway. I told him that believing something doesn't make it true and it doesn't make it right. I walked out of that facility lighter than I'd felt in years. I changed how I live now. Stronger safeguards. Clear boundaries. Trust earned, not assumed. I learned that instinct isn't paranoia, it's information. And the reason I'm still here isn't luck. It's because I paid attention. This story isn't just about betrayal or survival. It's about the quiet moments when something feels off and how easy it is to ignore those signals, because the danger wears the face of someone we love. The most frightening threats rarely arrive loudly. They sit across from us at dinner. They ask gentle questions. They tell us they care. If you've read this far, ask yourself one thing honestly. How many times have you dismissed your own instincts because it felt uncomfortable to question someone close to you? How often have you explained away red flags as stress, misunderstanding, or just overthinking? This story exists to challenge that reflex. Trust is powerful, but blind trust can be lethal. Awareness is not paranoia. Preparation is not cruelty. Protecting yourself does not mean you are heartless. It means you value your life, your work, and your future. The truth is, no one is entitled to your vulnerability simply because of a title like family, spouse, or partner. What happened here could have ended very differently if the warning signs had been ignored just a little longer. Survival didn't come from strength or luck alone, but from attention restraint and the willingness to act quietly instead of emotionally. Sometimes the most frightening betrayal isn't loud, it's quiet, seated across from you, dressed up as an ordinary meal. In moments like that, we learn how fragile trust can be and how quickly love can turn into a question mark. We also learn something else: staying calm isn't weakness. It's clarity. It's the small, steady choices that keep us safe long enough to see the truth for what it is, and to decide what we're willing to carry forward. And when the shock wears off, we're reminded that protecting your peace isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. If this story stirred something in you, an uneasy memory, a boundary you had to draw, a time you felt your instincts speak up, you're not alone. If you feel comfortable, share where you're watching from and leave a few lines in the comments. Only what you want to share. Sometimes just naming what happened can loosen its grip. And if you'd like to be part of a space where we listen without rushing to judge, you can subscribe and stay with us for the next story. Thanks for spending this time with us. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you again soon.